Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Chris Bellucci, and I'm going to be interviewing Paul V. Bellucci for his action that he saw in the Vietnam War. Thank you. All right, Paul.
Watch out for the lawyer.
Okay, why did you join the service? Or were you drafted? And how old were you?
I was 20 years old. I was drafted in the Army in 1968.
Okay. What were you doing before you joined the service?
I was a student. I was going to, I believe at the time, it was Holyoke Community College. And I received my draft notice, so I reported, and in Springfield, Mass.
Gotcha. What branch of service were you in? I'm assuming Army.
I was in the Army.
How did your parents feel about you joining the service?
I don't remember my father saying much about my being drafted in the Army. My mother wasn't very happy about it. As a matter of fact, there was a comment about me going to Canada, which obviously I didn't do, but she was very much against me going to Vietnam.
Where did you do your basic training?
I did my basic training, and I completed it at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
South Carolina. Gotcha. Was there a culture shock on your part, meeting people from all over the country?
Not really. I thought it was pretty interesting, meeting people from all over the country.
Did everyone get along pretty good, or?
Yes, we did.
Do you have any interesting stories from the basic training experience?
I wouldn't call it a culture shock, but growing up in Springfield, I had a pretty average upbringing as far as being a youth. I was an average student. I went to technical high school in Springfield, and I was an athlete. So my upbringing was pretty normal, and I was a kid. I went to basic training, and it was infantry training. It was very serious. I wasn't used to having a drill sergeant yelling and screaming and telling me what to do and when to do it. I was very good at what I did, as far as I kind of enjoyed it because it was a test as far as being in good physical condition and things that I kind of enjoyed doing, and the camaraderie that we developed as a unit even at basic training was tremendous.
What was your military occupational specialty?
I hate to say it, but I was trained to, I was an infantryman. So that's what I was trained to do.
Gotcha. And is that what they trained you to do that, and then when you went to Vietnam, things changed a little bit, or were they pretty much the same?
Well, actually, what they called was the MOS. It was basically my job description. It was 11B, which was infantry. After basic training, I went to advanced infantry training, and that was at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And I remember Georgia. I wasn't really thrilled about Georgia whatsoever. I remember it was the brown clay. But at Fort Gordon, we learned more of the specifics as far as what we would be doing
Over there.
in Vietnam, and the training was, with the firearms and the M14 and the M16, and learning how to use hand grenades and rocket launchers and all the weapons that were available at the time. Uh, so it was something new to me.
So this was available to everybody that went to boot camp that you were with in your whole unit. Everybody went to advanced infantry training.
Well, that was the MOS I was in.
Gotcha.
There were other MOSs, support type duties. My MOS was specifically light infantry.
Gotcha. In what zone of combat did you see action?
Our brigade main base was in Benoit. I was with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. I was there January of 1969. Benoit was, I'm embarrassed that I don't know specifically, but I think it was probably within 20 to 40 miles of Saigon, which at the time was the capital and still is the capital of Vietnam.
Okay. During your time in Vietnam, do you know what you were fighting for?
At that time, I did not specifically know what I was fighting for. I was drafted. I didn't know much about the politics of the war. I was a kid, much like the students at Wentworth Institute of Technology.
Do you believe that the United States government's mission was correct?
At the time, I did not specifically know if we were doing the right thing, but since then, I've read up on the Vietnam War. I actually took a class with my son concerning the Vietnam War, and I learned a lot about why we were there. Based on the information that I was able to develop, I believe that we should not have been there. It was a mistake. We lost a lot of my comrades, and in total there were 50 some odd thousand troops, American troops, that were killed in Vietnam. So I guess the answer to that question is that I don't believe that our purpose being there was justified.
Kind of runs into this question. Well, not really. Were you happy to be in Vietnam at the time?
At the time, I wasn't happy
Yeah.
to be in Vietnam. Like I said, I was drafted. I did not go because I felt that I had to go. There was an urgent need for me to go. But the way it turned out, the United States believed there was a reason for me to be there, so I went because I was asked to go.
What do you think of the Vietnamese people?
I have no hard feelings towards the Vietnamese people. I actually have a lot of respect for them. While I was in Vietnam and subsequent to my service in Vietnam, they're people just like we are. I learned after Vietnam that their culture, we did not understand the Vietnamese people and their culture. And that was a mistake. I think we made the same mistakes in Afghanistan and Iraq. We failed to understand the culture of those people and where they come from and their history. In Vietnam, part of their history was a number of wars that they were in that went back forever against the Chinese. World War II, it was the Japanese. And subsequent to that was the French, and then the United States. So we were the big bad guys, and they were just the little country.
Do you think that our lack of knowing their culture or understanding their culture led to why things escalated to where they were, or why we went to war with them?
yes and no. I think a lot of the reason we went to war, Ho Chi Minh was a hero to the Vietnamese people. It is quite possible, if the United States did things correctly, that, or not so much correctly, that Ho Chi Minh could have been an ally of the United States. But the way things worked out, because of the involvement of the Chinese and Russia, now we became the adversary. And Ho Chi Minh believed in his country and did what he thought was right for them.
Do the American soldiers act racially superior to the Vietnamese?
Not through my, I did not see that in my experiences. Obviously, it was a third world kind of a country. Medicine, food, drugs, wasn't clean. So it was kind of a culture shock for me. I did not specifically deal with the Vietnamese people, but I had nothing against them. Obviously, there was a language barrier. They spoke Vietnamese, I spoke English. And most of my time in Vietnam I was with, and I was in the, for the most part, very rare was I in the rear. I was specifically in the jungle, I was in the rice paddies, the rubber plantations. I did not specifically deal all that much with the Vietnamese people.
Do you ever think that this was just a civil war between the same people?
I didn't think about it when I was there. Now I can say that it was a civil war. They were all the same. They were all Vietnamese. It just so happened that there was a line demarcation between the North and the South. And the North was communist. The South was, I'm not exactly sure what it was. It was a puppet regime, very weak and very corrupt.
What was it like to go out on seek and destroy missions?
I don't believe there were seek and destroy. Those missions were more company type missions. I couldn't tell you how many of those that I was on. We'd be in the field for maybe 3 weeks to a month. The time that I was in Vietnam, it probably happened maybe 3 times, thereabouts. And like I said, it didn't happen that much. We would be dropped off typically by helicopter, and like I said, we'd spend maybe 20 days in the field as a company unit, and we would just march based on intelligence that there were VC, Viet Cong, or NVA in that geographic area, and the idea was to find them.
Do you know that the government was lying to the American public at home?
At the time, I wasn't aware of it. When I was in prior to Vietnam, I really never thought about it. Like I said, I was a kid going to college, and I was playing sports. I was an athlete. Really never thought too much about it. I wasn't a real political person. My parents weren't all that political. But subsequent to after leaving Vietnam and reading up on it, I learned that the government did not tell the truth to the American public. They hid some of the truths. They tried to cover up certain things, and because of that, to this day, I do have not a I don't totally trust things that have been told to me from our upper echelon.
Which is probably like related to today. I mean, all throughout, obviously, you second guess whenever like a government says something or, you know, brings about something because you know that they have the capability or the ability to do that.
Well, that's a good point. During the Vietnam War, it was probably the first time that the people at home rebelled against the government. That's never happened before. When the government said, you do something, you did it. And that's the way I was brought up. But many of my peers at the time, specifically people that did not go to Vietnam, they were against the war. And they were anti-government. And this was the first time anything like that ever happened. I don't believe it happened during World War I or World War II, where there was a kind of a revolt against what was going on in the country and the rioting and the civil unrest and everything else.
Tell us about some acts of heroism you saw.
Every day that I was in Vietnam, I believe the people I was with were heroes every single day. What they gave up and what they did. Never knowing if they would ever return to their families. We were scared the whole time we were there. I know I was. And I was dead set on coming home. So I was very careful in Vietnam. I can give you a story. As soon as I arrived in Vietnam, I was only there probably a week. And I have to say the training that I received to prepare me for Vietnam was not as good as it wasn't as good as it should have been. I wasn't prepared in advance to what I saw in Vietnam. I'll tell you a couple examples. I was there, like I said, only about a couple of weeks. The new guy, and I was the new guy, typically they put you on the worst assignment. So I was designated the point guy. So every time we'd go on patrol, I'd be the first guy. And it was okay, although at first I didn't know any better. I decided that I don't like this job all that much, because when you make contact, you're the guy that's right there in the front.
Yeah.
So I wasn't too thrilled about that. But I remember one night we set up ambush outside of it was a village. It was a village that we had seen on other occasions. We never really went through the village all that often. We made a mistake. We set up right outside the village. It was still daylight. And for the most part, what we would do is, we would sometimes do something like that, but prior to darkness, we would move. And then we would set up some place where the enemy would not know where we were. Obviously, on this occasion, we were a little bit naive. We set up, and that night, probably around, I want to say midnight, all hell broke loose. We were set up by, it was like a monument, and there was a bomb crater adjacent to the monument. And we're probably, I don't even remember, I want to guess, most of our ambushes were 7 to 8 guys, soldiers. And we were probably no more than 100 yards from the village. And we were hit with automatic weapons, grenade launchers, just about everything. And it got so bad, well, I woke up I was sleeping, and I just jumped in the hole. My weapon was still, not that I'm proud of this, but when you're in a situation like that, it was the first time I wasn't really prepared. And I jumped in the hole, and all I remember was, and I was closest to the village. So the rest of the other 7 or 8 GIs were on the other side of the berm.
Shooting over you all over the hole.
No, they really weren't shooting over me. We were hit so hard, none of us, not one of us, got a round off. And what happened, one of the guys, and I hate to admit it, I don't remember his name. He got up, he was killed, as far as I know. We called in, anytime we made contact, we would call in helicopters. And so the helicopters took about 30 minutes, and they shot up the area for probably a good 25 minutes of the 30 minutes. They were so close, I could hear them. We were lucky that we weren't overrun. To this day, I don't really know why we weren't. Like I said, we never got a shot off. Probably about the 21st minute, we finally did return some fire, and they just left. It was probably Vietcong, BC, that were tied to that village, and that's the way it was in Vietnam. That during the daytime, they were our friends and GI and all this other stuff, but at night they were terrorized by the Vietcong, and they were Vietcong sympathizers. So anyways, the one soldier was we called it a dust-off. The helicopter picked him up, and the medevac took him away. So that was my first contact in Vietnam. I've got another one that I probably, and this is as far as I'm going to go as far as what happened to me in Vietnam. But we were kind of waltzing down a trail, and we walked into a Vietcong encampment. I want to say there were probably 8 to 10 Vietcong, and they heard us coming, so they just started running with their weapons. They left everything. They had their clothes hanging on, I want to say it was like a clothesline, but they were drying their clothes, and they didn't expect us, so they were as surprised as we were, and they just took off. And at the time I was a radio operator, and I didn't tell you the story about that. Not too long after that, I was the point guy. I said, is there another job that I could do besides point? They said, we got a great job for you. And like I said, I was pretty athletic. I was a real strong kid, and I could swim, which was, in Vietnam, was very important. Because there's many rivers there, and you had to cross rivers, and a lot of GIs couldn't swim. So I was the radio operator, and I was probably maybe third in the patrol. And the machine gun was right there, and we just shot up the area. And we hit a Vietcong. And the way it turned out, they dragged this VC, and I say that's what we call them, but with respect. And they dragged that person as far as they could. And we followed the trail. It was a blood trail. And we saw a person on the ground. Didn't know. We were scared. They were scared. Everybody was scared. And we just shot the heck out of the area. It was and the way it turned out, it was I never forget this. It was a woman, and we were never trained, and I never thought that something like that would happen. That she could have been a mother. Who knows? But the fact that it was a female really hit me when I was there. So those are a couple of the things that happened while I was in Vietnam.
In terms of your officers, were they as bad as they were portrayed in the movies?
For the most part, I spent a year in Vietnam. most of our patrols, we did not have officers. On one occasion, we had a lieutenant. He was very good. I can give you another story. We were in the rice paddies in Vietnam, and we would do patrols. And this was a rice paddy that we were kind of familiar with. On this one particular occasion, it was a lieutenant, and many times our lieutenants, when we had them, which was rare, they typically would kind of lean towards the back of the patrol, not in the front of the patrol. So when I had those kind of lieutenants, sometimes I was kind of happy I was towards the back of the patrol, you know. Because like I said, I was the radio operator.
And
When
they
you're
need
the
that,
radio
yeah.
operator, you're with the lieutenant or the sergeant in charge or whatever. Because if anything happened, when the, excuse my expression, the shit hit the fan, you had to call in to higher ups or artillery your position. They obviously knew where we were going because we would tell them beforehand, so they were kind of prepared. And so if you made contact, you would have to call in your position in order, and what they would typically do was fire what they called Willie Peter, white phosphorus. And then we did what we called fire for effect. Once we determined that we were safe, then we'd tell them fire for effect, and they'd start shooting the artillery. So, what was the question again, Chris, again?
Were your officers as bad as they were portrayed
Oh.
in the movies?
On this one particular occasion, this officer turned out to be a lifesaver. We were walking patrol, and he noticed a wire, and it turned out to be tripwire, and it was attached to a claymore. If we hit that wire, many of us would have been dead. But it just so happened, he saw this wire. I don't know if it was part of his training or luck, or the man upstairs decided it wasn't our time. We survived that situation. We disarmed the claymore, and I have to say, based on that, he probably saved a lot of grunts. We used to call ourselves grunts, or everybody else called us grunts, lives. And in conjunction with that, as I talk about booby traps, that was the one thing I was totally scared of, or afraid of. And the Viet Cong, NVA, mostly Viet Cong, would set up around their villages or sacred areas or whatever, booby traps. And we lost many GIs with booby traps. Sometimes they would even mark the areas. I remember they called it Tudia, which meant, I believe it meant something to do with explosives. But we knew when we were going through these areas that they were mined and there were explosives and those kind of things.
Gotcha. Did you ever have a feeling that you were winning the war?
Well, it sounded like we were doing pretty good, although the Vietnam War turned out to be even when I came back to we called it the world, being the United States. It became a statistics-oriented war. How many KIAs? How many people? How many VC and NVA did we kill? So the generals and the military, because that's what our government wanted to know, how many VC, NVA did we kill? And from what we understood, we were killing a lot more than they were killing us. So anyways, let's move on to the next one. I guess that covered that,
Yeah.
I believe.
What did you think of your fighting foe, either the Viet Cong or the Army of North Vietnam? I went to Vietnam
like I said, a kid. I wasn't a real violent person when I went to Vietnam. I was an angry person when I came back from Vietnam, but I wasn't angry when I went. And I believe that many of the GIs in Vietnam were not prepared. The Vietnamese, like I said, were used to war, and they believed that what they were doing was a just and correct thing to do. So they were in it for the duration, and they were. I was very proud of my service, but it was different. As an example, another example, they had women that fought. I mean, we weren't used to that. We weren't even trained. What do you do if a woman pops up, or some kid with a gun? I wasn't even trained in that area. So it was because of that, I think that just that hesitation was enough to get you killed. And there was no hesitation on their part. So I had I mean, the women in Vietnam, they would carry 55-gallon drums. They were just strong people and strong-willed people, you know.
Could you trust the native South Vietnamese people?
I didn't trust anybody in Vietnam. I trusted my comrades we were together. I trusted those guys for the most part. There were a few that I didn't trust because they could not. They couldn't do their job in all situations. There were people out there that should not have been there with us. They physically couldn't do it. They were not mentally in a position to be in Vietnam. I was afraid just getting on helicopters. I couldn't tell you how many hours that I spent on helicopters. There was no reason to be fully locked and loaded on a helicopter, and then, you know, on a Huey. And we had guys that, because of their incompetence, were ready to shoot up the area. You know, we're jumping out of planes, and you're worried about being killed by, we used to call him Charlie. You had to worry sometimes about the guy next to you, that he was going to do the right thing. So
Shooting
there
the
were
right
guys in
direction.
Vietnam shooting themselves because they were so afraid. They couldn't handle the pressure, and they'd shoot themselves in the foot just to get out of the field. And so.
Did you hate the hippies and college students at home?
I had nothing against the hippies or college students at home. I really didn't think so much about them. I don't remember so much where I was. Springfield, Massachusetts, you know, I'm sure we had our hippies and long hairs and all that other stuff. But I don't remember so much when I went. When I came back, that was a different story. And then, since then, reading up on Vietnam, you know, the culture at the time and the, you know, Woodstock and everything else. I actually loved the music. When I was in Vietnam, the music was cool. I still go back to the music in the 70s and the 60s, and it just brings back, just listening to the sounds of that era brings back so much emotion in me. Brings me back to Vietnam and my youth.
Gotcha. Tell us about your combat experiences of Vietnam. I mean, obviously you've mentioned a few different occurrences that have happened, but were there any times when maybe you lost a few guys, or in your company or something like that?
There were, like I said, there were many booby traps. We lost many of the people in my company. Not always a They weren't always killed. They were mostly maimed. On some occasions, they were killed, depending on the strength of the booby trap. Firefights. There were a number of those. We did not lose a lot of guys in firefights. It was mostly a kind of a hit and a run. I was never in a firefight longer than, like I said, 30 minutes. They didn't last that long. During the Vietnam War, there were some battles that lasted days and whatever. I was never in anything like that. I couldn't even think about
Yeah, like the Hamburger
something like
Hill
that.
and all those other.
Hamburger
yeah.
Hill, nothing like that happened to me. We didn't do a lot of work in villages. I was mostly in the jungle, and we knew if we ran into anybody out there, they were VC and VA. They weren't friendly. So it was pretty simple for us. If they weren't American soldiers, they were the bad guy. So it was automatic, shoot them up. So that's pretty much how things worked in Vietnam. I had one other situation where that I remember specifically. We were on a combat mission. What they would do is they would insert us in areas that they had intelligence that they were NVA, VC, whatever. And typically what we would do is we would be dropped in a landing zone. On this occasion, it was, I believe it was probably, I don't believe it was a company, but it was at least half the company. It was quite a few of us. There were a number of helicopters. So they would insert us. We spent maybe, I want to say that this was a short expedition we were on. And it probably lasted about, I want to say, no more than 3 days. So we were dropped in. Typically, when we were dropped in, the gunners would shoot up the area with M60 fire. We used to call it, they prepped the area, and I used to hate that. And I should have been aware every single time because, like I said, I had to be on at least 50 helicopter missions where they were in service. Sometimes they would land. Many times they couldn't land, so they would hover, and we would have to jump out of the Hueys. And you have to think about this. I'm carrying probably about 80 pounds worth of gear. I was a radio operator, so I had what they called we called it excuse my language, a Prick 25. It was the radio. I forget how many pounds that was with the battery and everything else, but it was on my back. I'd have two bandanas, one across my waist, actually 3 altogether, hand grenades, smoke grenades, water, food. So I had a lot of weight that I carried, plus my M16. So we would make a perimeter, and then we would all gather, and then we would do the patrol. We came back. I believe it was around or close to, or it could have been the same LZ. And the helicopters came in, they extracted us. And I was in the helicopter, I was in the one before this actual helicopter. And I remember it was alongside a river, there were a lot of trees there. And the blades of the helicopter I was in, never thought twice about it, hit the tree, hit the branches and hit the leaves. The helicopter after me. And it was guys from my platoon. I want to say 7 guys on it, maybe 8 GIs on the helicopter. One of the guys was a sergeant. I remember the guy was a real athlete, good kid. And another guy, his name was Moore. He was a black guy, nice guy. And I spent some time with those guys. They were in my platoon. When I did ambush, many times they weren't with me, but I was with them a lot. And what happened was the helicopter hit the branches, went into the river, and I think one of the pilots, he was saved. The rest of them, they never got their rucksacks off, or their gear, and they were killed. It was non-combat, but it was a area that was heavily booby-trapped, and there were NVA and VC in the area. So, and the thing that bothers me to this day, their bodies were never found. So they were missing in action in Vietnam. So I've got a picture of myself with these. There were only 14 GIs in the picture. 7 of those 14 were killed in Vietnam. So.
How long does it take to become immune to combat and the killing?
You're never immune. You think about it. Not that I was involved in a lot of killing. I mean, many times I shot my weapon and I didn't even aim, I just shot. So, but you never get used to that. Especially if when I was a kid I had no training in that. I never even hurt an animal. So Vietnam was a real stretch beyond what I was about before Vietnam.
Yeah. Did you get a high from combat, or was that mostly just being scared? Because obviously, whenever you got any type of like VC or Viet Cong, obviously that's a scary moment. Did you get a high from that, or was that mostly just like trying to stay alive?
Well, I guess you get a high from it because the high for me was not to kill as many VC and NV as I could. The high is that your adrenaline is kicking in now,
yeah.
And you're thinking that it's either me or him. It's like being on a soccer field, the state championship. I guess it's not the same thing, but you have to perform, and you got to do the best you can, and you're performing at a very high level, and hopefully the adrenaline, you can control it, and your training kicks in, or your experience kicks in. I told you about when I was new, what happened, and I jumped in the hole. That never happened again because I was more experienced, and I knew that gun is going to be right next to me, and if something happens, I'm prepared. So you're prepared, and you do what you have to do.
And speaking of highs, were drugs prevalent in Vietnam?
Drugs were very prevalent in Vietnam, but I'll tell you what, because I did not see drugs in the field, meaning in the jungle. We weren't using drugs. I didn't even like guys smoking cigarettes because at night especially you would give away your position. So the platoon I was with, when I did ambushes, which we did a lot of them, most of my time in Vietnam, we would do what we call ambushes. We would set up and wait for the VC or NVA to walk into us. So, but I don't remember in the field anybody ever doing drugs. When we went back to Brigade Main Base, that was a different thing. And most of the people I was with, as far as I know, weren't doing drugs. If they did any kind of drugs, it was marijuana. They weren't doing any heroin and the heavy-duty drugs that they talked about in some of these movies in Vietnam. I never saw it. I can tell you that marijuana was very prevalent. I was not a user in Vietnam. My peers in Vietnam and when I returned from Vietnam were prevalent users. It was part of the culture at the time. But I was not a user, and I didn't see a lot of that. I did my share of drinking because, you know, we came back alive and we were a band of brothers. So we'd come back and they would have what they called like a stand down. And they always had beer for us, and I drank plenty of beer at that time. Though even at the brigade main base, which didn't happen often, we were in the field most of the time I was in Vietnam. And even when I came back sometimes, or most of the time, they'd have us filling sandbags, and, you know, for some reason, the grunts, infantry, never got the best of jobs. We would do latrine duty. Not that I don't remember ever doing that one. But sometimes I'd be going up in a tower at the brigade main base, and think of this, being up in a tower, I don't know how many feet up. It had to be, I want to say, you'd be probably 100 feet in the air, easy, in a tower. And, you know, when they would bomb, you know, they would every so often toss a few, you know, some artillery into the base, and my job was to watch to see where it was coming from, to tell our artillery, you know, that they're, you know, 20 clicks or 20 miles to the west. That's where I'm seeing the flash, and then they would shoot in that direction, so they would return the fire. But here you'd be 100 feet in the air on the ground, you know, taking incoming artillery. Not a real, you know, not a real good place to be.
Yeah. How were you treated when you got home?
Well, for one thing, the trip home was wonderful, I have to say, and it was bad in the same breath. It was wonderful because I made it, and I was set from day one to come home. I was very careful in Vietnam. I did everything the way I was supposed to, and I didn't take any chances, and I made it. I was infantry the whole time I was there. But the positive was I made it and I was flying home. I guess the positive was on the plane from, I believe it was Thompson Newt in Vietnam. Is that correct? I think that's where it was. I flew with other GIs. When I got back to the States, there was no
Welcome home party?
well, there was no party, but they didn't psychologically talk to any of the veterans coming back. You know, here we are, we spent a year in Vietnam getting shot at, going through what we did, and there was no reintroduction to the world, to the States.
Like where the states were at the time, you know what I mean? Or...
Well, just, you know, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I went through what I did, and they could have done a better job, the Army and the government, reintroducing GIs that were trained to kill people, to come back to the world and be productive people, you know. So that was a problem probably for me and for a lot of other GIs. Then all of a sudden I'm on a plane with civilians going to Bradley Field in Hartford, Connecticut. And I remember this almost like the back of my hand. It was a really awful, I believe it was evening when we flew into Bradley Field. And I remember praying to God, and I prayed to God a lot in Vietnam also. And I wasn't a real religious person, but I got religion when I was in Vietnam. And I prayed to God that that plane would not crash. I said, I made it this far, and please God, I want to get home. And obviously here I am, 62 years old. I did make it home, and I was reunited with my family, but I found out real quick that nobody understood Vietnam. Even my siblings did not understand what I went through, and they just couldn't correlate with the war. So that was tough.
What are your biggest regrets about your military service in Vietnam? Or if there were any.
I don't have any regrets. I was very proud of my service. I'm glad that I did what I did. I'm glad that I went. It kind of made me the person I am today. I'm not sure if the reasons that we fought that war were correct. I don't believe they were. But I think the Vietnam War helped our country and has an effect on our young soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. The things that we did wrong in the Vietnam War, I believe we've corrected some of those things. I do believe we've made some of the same mistakes that we made in the Vietnam War, but I think we've done a better job, and specific, and especially to our veterans, that returning veterans, we've done more for them than they ever did for the Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
They, I remember this, we were baby killers and all this other stuff. I really didn't go through a lot of that. When I came back with my I know the war was very unpopular. We tried to forget about it the best we could.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was all my friends after the war, when I came back from Vietnam, were all Vietnam veterans. So that became my sounding board, and those became my friends. And we would, I was still 21 years old. I was still a kid. And I remember at the time I was probably doing a little more going to bars and things like that than I should have. But I was hanging out all with Vietnam vets. And I remember talking about the drugs. There were probably more drugs I remember in the States after Vietnam than I remember in Vietnam. And there was always young people passing around joints and things like that. And I was a real good boy.
Did you receive any medals?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Oh, all right. I'll show you the medals that I received. Let me see if I can get it right side up. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to put it to the side. Can you get the medals here?
Yeah, hold on one
I have to
second.
look at them so I know what I'm talking about. What happened was my lovely wife did this for me. This was a couple years ago, and I'm very happy that she did this. This medal here I'm very proud of. That is it has the rifle there. That's what they call the CIB. That's the Combat Infantry Badge. These badges here, this one and this one, these two badges I received in basic training. That was my, this one here was my, that was a sharpshooter badge for the M14. This was the expert badge for the M16. So all that did was designated me as able to fire my weapon competently. I was pretty good at that. This one, and I'm not sure which is which, I should know. These badges are what they call the Army Commendation Medals. And the other two of the four are called the Vietnam Service Medals. So those are the medals, pretty much what I received when I was in Vietnam.
Gotcha.
And that was for my year of service. It's interesting, though, I came back from Vietnam, and for about a year I struggled, like a lot of Vietnam vets. I think it's one of the questions. So I won't get into that. Let me show you my hat. Let me show you the hat that I picked up at the VA. This is the unit I was with, this is the unit I was with in Vietnam. It's the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. And this unit, I'm going to put it on my head for a second. This unit was new. It was, I'm not sure what the word is, but it was the inauguration. The beginning of the unit was the Vietnam War. It was specifically created for Vietnam. I believe the unit, I think it started around, I was there 1969 to 1970, probably about 1967 or 68. It might have been 1968. And what happened was the unit was decommissioned. I'm not sure if that's the term, during the Vietnam War. So before the war ended, it returned from Vietnam to the States, and that was pretty much the reason for this unit. They believed for Vietnam, because of the guerrilla type warfare, that they needed soldiers that were light infantry, quick, and could get in and out of areas quickly. That was the purpose of the unit.
Well, I appreciate you meeting with me, and thank you for your service, and hopefully this will be used for good use. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, my son.
Yeah, I think it's already over. So.
Did it end?